Hi, everyone. I'm going to go off camera in a minute because my Wi-Fi is having trouble handling both the image and the and my voice. So, but I want to start by welcoming everyone to today's NIH Office of Dietary Supplements webinar. I'm Barbara Sorkin. I co-direct NIH's Consortium Advancing Research on Botanicals and Other Natural Products, as well as I have been organizing this seminar series. So a few brief announcements before I introduce today's eminent speaker. First, with apologies if you're all a bit over having changes announced, but this one I think is a good change. In the fall, when the ODS seminars resume after our summer vacation, you will see a new younger face introducing the ODS seminars. My ODS colleague, Dr. Jasmine Hayes, will be the new breath of fresh air. I know she's going to have some exciting speakers for you in the fall. And if you have some great ideas for ODS speakers, please let her know, Jasmine Hayes at ODS. And if you want to make sure that you're the first to know who's giving those talks and when, please send an email to that effect to the email address that we'll be adding to the chat. You should have an icon for that near the top of your screen. And you will also see it on the next slide. So in the interest of audio quality, and because these are the professional behaviors that we require of all participants in our ODS seminars, showing you these. You've all been muted on entry, and we ask that you please stay muted until the final questions and answers. You do have access to the chat, and we encourage you to put your questions for our speaker in the chat as they arise. If I see any that seem urgent, I'll try to get her attention to ask them. Otherwise, we'll take as many as we can fit at the end of her presentation. And please also use the chat if you're having technical problems with the webinar, audio or visual or the closed captions. And one of us at the NIH end will try to help. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Helene Langevin is the director of the NIH's National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, or NCCIH. And she is going to discuss the nutrition continuum and its relationship to whole person health today. A few words about Dr. Langevin. She received her medical degree from McGill University, Montreal, completed a postdoctoral research fellowship in neurochemistry at the Medical Research Council's Neurochemical Pharmacology Unit in Cambridge, England, and did a residency in internal medicine and a fellowship in endocrinology and metabolism at Johns Hopkins. As a professor of neurological sciences at the University of Vermont Larner College of Medicine, and then as director of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine, which is jointly based at Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Harvard Medical School, from 2012 to 2018, her research interests centered around the role of connective tissue in chronic musculoskeletal pain and the mechanisms of acupuncture, mechanisms of action of acupuncture and manual and movement-based therapies. Dr. Langevin came to the NIH as the director of NCCIH in 2018. And with that, let me stop sharing my slides. Where is the stop share button?
So move your mouse to the top of the screen and you should be able to have controls pop out, or
I still see share button, James.
So I think if we want to just let Helen go ahead and start sharing, she'll take over.
Okay, so Elaine, apologies for that glitch. There we go. Yep. We will let you know if we're having any trouble hearing you.
Okay, does this work? Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to go to
presentation? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Barbara. Really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this wonderful seminar from that ODS has been holding for such a long time, and glad. I mean, I'm sorry that this is going to be your last one, Barbara. We'll try to make it.
What a bang up way for me to finish. Thank you.
So I'll be talking about whole person health and the nutrition continuum. And just to give you first an idea of what do we mean by these terms. So let me see if I can advance my slides now. Whoops. There we go. First of all, what about whole person health? What do we mean by that? What we contrast the whole person health approach to sort of the conventional approach that we have to treating diseases, where we treat a disease usually once it's diagnosed. And typically these diseases are diagnosed one organ or system at a time, and they're treated with a combination of medication, sometimes surgery, but they're really treated in a separate fashion. And in contrast to that, the concept of whole person health recognizes that there's a path going between health and disease that goes through these sort of intermediary states where there are opportunities along the way to restore health. If we pay attention to a lot of the predisposing factors that can lead to disease, including poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, and importantly, chronic stress and poor sleep. And by paying attention to all of these, we need to really understand better how to apply a combination of self-care and multi-component non-pharmacological interventions, including psychological, nutritional, physical approaches to restore health. That's the idea behind whole person health. So, of course, the other important thing about this is that we're not really thinking about people as individuals isolated from their surrounding environment, right? A person's social and physical environment play a big role in this. The other thing is that, and so there's a link between, you know, the what we call the biological, behavioral, social, and environmental components of whole person health. The same thing, and what I'm going to talk about, linking this to what we call the nutritional continuum, is that the health of an individual is very much linked to the health of the community that they live in, as well as extending this all the way to the whole population and eventually to the planet. We really understand now more and more that all of these components of health are linked together. So let's see. No, it's not advanced. Okay. This leads us to this idea of the nutrition continuum. And I was really, really very fortunate and happy to be able to have this wonderful collaboration with the leadership of the Office of Nutrition Research, Office of Dietary Supplements, the Office, the National Institute of Nursing Research, and NCCIH all work together to publish a paper recently in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition called A Broader Perspective on Nutrition Research, Integrating the Entire Continuum of Human Nutrition. So this is what I'm going to talk about. How does this concept of the nutrition continuum relate to the concept of whole person health? Some of it is intuitive, but some of this requires digging a little bit into. So the other thing that is very exciting to us is to see the recent release of this wonderful strategic plan from the Office of Nutrition Research that really essentially makes this link. ONR outlines a vision that considers nutrition as central to the whole person health from the first to last days of life, as well as across generations. So you can see that a lot of us at NIH are really thinking alike. And this is great because it means that we can really collaborate very in ways that are very exciting. So what about this nutrition continuum? This would be the sort of what we would aspire to, right? Where we would have health that would be on a continuum from health of the soil, for example, health of agricultural practices that promote and the health of the environment, of the planet, to also applying this so that people and their families and their communities can eat healthy food. We know a lot about what is a healthy diet, what is a balanced diet, but the difficulty is how do you help people to achieve that? From knowing, understanding, learning how to cook, from practicing what we call mindful eating, which is helping people to really pay attention to what they're eating, and to understand how best to give people advice about what should be on their plate and what are the components of the diet that are maximally beneficial to us, all the way down to what these components of those foods are, down to individual components, including things like probiotics or dietary herbs or other types of components of the food. Unfortunately, this is what we see in real life. The situation right now is very dire. We really do not have a very healthy and food continuum in general. This has very clearly been very highlighted very eloquently by the HHS administration and the problem that we're having right now with an unhealthy food. A lot of the food that are available for people to eat are not optimally promoting health. What does that mean? It means that we often use agricultural practices that deplete the soil, that overuse fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, mass-produced farming, food deserts where people do not have access to healthy foods. A lot of times, in some people's main access, especially in rural areas, they do not have even access to fresh produce. Fast food, which is really taking over how people are less and less people are cooking for themselves, just basically grab what they can find, and food that is addictive in itself, create and maintains a cycle of food addiction, craving, calorie dense, nutrient poor food, and unfortunately using dietary supplements instead of food. This is a pattern that is very prevalent. So what can we do about that? So let's first look at our understanding about about how we grow our food. So we're starting to understand that there are some components of foods that are very important and that are relevant to not only how healthy the food, the plants are when they grow, but also how healthy humans are when they consume the food. And a great example of this is some flavonoid components of plants that we know are linked to oxidative stress. When a plant is under stress, either because they're undergoing a drought or there's not enough nutrients in the soil that they consume, that they're planted in, what the plant does in response to that is it synthesizes components that help the plant to overcome these oxidative stresses. And we know that these same flavonoids, when ingested by humans, can have effects on many aspects of health, including immune function, lipid metabolism, etc., and may be important in aging. What is also important to realize is that the interaction of both at the level of the soil and at the level of the humans involve in dealing with these flavonoids involve interaction with microbes. So when the plant is grown in an environment where the microbe constitution of the soil is healthy, that essentially kind of helps the plant to synthesize the flavonoids. And the same thing when some of these same flavonoids that we ingest in our gut, we need the bacteria in the gut to break down those molecules into components that can then be metabolized and utilized, and we know that they can have an effect on the brain and on metabolism. So paying attention to the soil in which the plants are growing can have effects that are parallel to those that, from a microbial standpoint, to those that are going on in our bodies. And so this is important because we know that when we utilize what's called the regenerative agriculture practices, where not only are returning carbon to the soil in the form of organic fertilizer, that not only brings carbon back to the soil, which is an important source of avoiding capture carbon from being into the atmosphere, but also returning microbes to the soil at the same time. And so really understanding how best agricultural practices can evolve in such a way that they can support health of both the planet as well as people is something that's extremely important that we all need to do. And we recognizing that link is extremely important. So let's now move on to what happens once the food is actually produced and how it accesses people. And I talked about not only buying the food, but also preparing it and understanding and having the knowledge of how to do that. A lot of times in this day and age, a lot of people grew up in environments where they didn't learn how to cook in their homes because either both parents were working and there was not food being grown in the home. And so there's a whole generation of people in this country who are adults now who don't know how to cook. And this is what some of these programs are addressing. At the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, there's a Healthy Teaching Kitchen program and also the Teaching Kitchen Collaborative, which is a network of teaching kitchens that are distributed in places like community centers, schools, hospitals, etc. It's literally teach people how to cook. This is an essential skill. If people don't know how to cook, they're not going to be able to buy the produce, know what to buy, know how to prepare it in ways that are affordable and to improve their diets. So there are some evidence that this is actually beneficial here. Here's a study that was published just very recently about interacting cooking lessons to improve attitudes toward food and weight in children. So this is teaching kids how to cook in schools. Very importantly, this study needs to be followed up by. This was not a randomized study, but it points out something that's really important, is that the children who at baseline had a healthy weight their weight did not change during the intervention, but kids who weight was low was not at a healthy weight, was too low, they gained weight, and those whose weight was high lost weight. And so it suggests that this is something that can be beneficial. We pay a lot of attention to children who are overweight, but there's also a lot of children who have eating problems, who are either fussy eaters or not eating a variety of food, only eat 2 or 3 things. As a parent of a fussy eater herself, my daughter, when she was young, had that problem. And this is a problem to eat a balanced diet when the kids will only eat the 2 or 3 things. And they found that this program improved that. Here's another aspect of food delivery is a food prescription program. This is now increasingly there's the issue, the concept of social prescribing is gaining a lot of traction. A lot of it is overseas in places like Great Britain, United Kingdom, and in other European countries. But it's starting to get some attention here in the U.S. as well. This is a food prescription program where primarily in low-income population, where they did a systematic review of studies that looked at that and found that there were significant changes in improvements in body mass index, as well as what people were actually eating, the daily servings of fruit and vegetables. When these food delivery programs where fresh fruit and produce was delivered to the homes, getting around people who either don't have the time, if they're working 2 jobs, for example, they don't have time to go. Grocery stores maybe that sell fruit and vegetables may be far away, they can't access them, or sometimes missing altogether. You can see here that there were trends towards improvements in hemoglobin A1C and systolic blood pressure, but they were not statistically significant. The duration of this intervention was relatively short, so they was generally measured in weeks to months. So it's important to think about what would this be like on the long term. So here's another aspect of this, which is looked at the health and economic impact over a longer period of time, where they estimated, this is a simulation study, but they looked over a lifetime of what it would cost to do this, to essentially prescribe, deliver food to the homes of people who are in low in economic status. And what they found is that accounting for the cost and the administrative cost of this program, they calculated these quality life adjustment years of how much it would cost, and $18,000 over the course of the lifetime is what it would cost. And if you compare that, and this is generally considered cost effective, because if you compare to a medication, for example, a statin, for example, for primary prevention, you can see that the cost of that is $37,000, a lot more expensive, even though statins are not particularly expensive drugs. So, so you can see that this is something that we need to think about in terms of helping people to eat better food. So now, what about the food eating behavior itself? This is really, really important. We know now that there are aspects of food behavior that is very much beyond our conscious control, and this goes back to the what we call this three different aspects of the brain, right? The automatic, autonomic, or vegetative brain, the mesolimbic, or sort of more sort of emotionally driven brain, and then the neocortex, which has to do with more our intentional behavior. And food eating behavior follows very much this pattern. You can see that hunger-based eating behavior that you find in any animal, for example, involves the feeling of being hungry, a sensation which we're very much getting interested in from the point of view of neurosciences, is interoception, your ability to perceive the signals from within your organs that tells you whether you're thirsty or hungry or tired or whatever. And then the hypothalamus, which is essentially, drives all of this and integrates this with the autonomic nervous system. And then the mesolimbic system, which is the reward systems in the brain that motivates, for example, an animal to go get food. A lot of times, this involves behavior that can be stressful or dangerous. So the animal needs to be motivated, right, to do this. And so this is very much tied to this kind of reward-based behavior that involves dopamine circuits, and that are very much involved in our stress response. And then finally, there's this sort of more evolved sort of neocortical executive function that we call, that really can override a lot of these sort of more emotional driven behaviors and automatic behaviors through intention. And this is where this concept of mindful eating behavior comes from. So, okay, so what about the influences of our social environment on this? Well, we know, right, that environmental stressors and especially there's a lot of attention paid by these days to the effect of ultra processed foods and food advertising on what people will put in their mouth and eat. And we all know that this is playing a huge factor. And now we also having these very, very fascinating new drugs that are developed, the GLP-1 agonists. These are the drugs that have an effect on not only our appetite, weight reduction, but also we're finding that these drugs have an effect on all kinds of other types of cravings that involve these sort of dopamine circuits, different types of addictions, for example. And these drugs are being investigated and to see how they can help. But importantly, we don't know the long-term effects of drugs like this, especially if they are administered to growing children or adolescents. And at the other end of the spectrum, we know that there are methods that we have that are well established for managing stress and for improving our sensations, our response to internally driven sensations, such as hunger, such as our sensations of being under stress. And so cognitive behavior therapy, for example, is something that we know we can utilize our executive function and our emotion regulation to basically manage some of the stresses that we have. So I think that both that clearly the drugs, the GLP-1 agonist drugs are going to play a very important role in the sort of obesity crisis that we're having in this country, but they're not the only thing that we should be obviously looking at. I think it's very important that we really understand how best to use these non-pharmacological methods as well. Let's now move on to dietary supplements and this issue of what is the optimal use of dietary supplements? And certainly they should not, we know very clearly that we should not be using them instead of food. And unfortunately, this happens all too often. And the problem we're having, it is very difficult for us to even understand and know how dietary supplements are being used. It's not a secret that assessing the dietary supplement intake is extremely challenging. If you did a dietary recall and asked people what type of supplements they take, a lot of times people will not even be able to describe what the supplement is. In order to really understand what it is that people are taking, you need to actually look at what is on the labels of some of these multitudes of different supplements that are available to people, and the doses are all over the place. Some of these supplements, even simple vitamins, are sold in massive doses that are way beyond the recommended dietary allowance. And we have no idea what this is all doing to people's diets. So fortunately, there's now an effort at NIH that is well underway to adding dietary supplement intake assessment to existing digital dietary assessment tools. And this is the ASA 24, which is a automated, self-administered 24-hour dietary recall, which is you can do from your phone or computer. And right now, this is for food, but it is being adapted for dietary supplements. So we're really excited about this. Might hopefully include even pictures of the pill bottles, so that dietary supplement bottles, so that this and analysis using AI and to really be able to get a sense of not just what people are taking, but how much they are taking. And now finally, I'm going to move on to this other category of sort of food-related components, which is what we call the bioactive compounds that are contained in food. And this is important because we've known, this has been known for millennia, right? That some plants, some food components, mainly plants, but not exclusively plants, are being used for their medicinal properties. And a lot of research on botanicals and natural products that we fund at NCCIH is really geared towards understanding that. A lot of these medicinal plants that have been traditionally used are a lot of times, the traditional use is to use them in, for example, in teas or decoctions. But increasingly, there's an effort to understand the compounds that are contained in these preparations and what is the actual ingredient. And a lot of times what can happen is that once an isolated ingredient is identified and understood, some drugs can be derived from these natural products. And of course, a lot of drugs that we know, from the very simple drugs that have been used for decades, are natural product. Aspirin is a great example of that. Acetylsalicylic acid, one of the drugs that we use the most, and even opiates or many other drugs are derived from natural products. So but what about how should this type of research be conducted in order to derive the maximal benefit from these?
Helene, we just lost your voice.
Okay, it happened.
Okay, but we got you back in time.
It's back now, right? Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so let's look at the predominant model that we use when we do research, not just on botanicals, but on any kind of medical research. A very, very predominant model is that when we are trying to understand how a given compound can be used therapeutically, we look, for example, as what is the target? We look for a molecular target. We look for a dose that can reliably induce modification of the target. And typically, we increase the dose until we find an effect that is reliable, that can be measured. And the effects that we look at are typically measured in short-term effects. They're not effects that are measured over years and decades, right? They're effects that are measured over days or weeks or months. So in contrast to that, the whole person health research model is different. It instead of looking at a single target from a drug, we consider that there a specific food or a specific component of a food or a specific other type of non-pharmacological intervention, such as exercise or stress management, may have effects on multiple different systems. It's not just effect on one target. The other important consideration is that sometimes the dose of the compounds or the interventions that we are doing may be important, and sometimes a low dose can have a different effect from a high dose, and we need to understand that. And finally, the types of effects that we are looking for may be on a different time frame. They may be longer term. They may be adaptive or protective or preventive, as opposed to short-term effects, such as, for example, analgesia, right? Giving an analgesic for pain typically reduces pain for a short period of time. Once the analgesic wears off, the pain comes back. Whereas if you're looking at a longer-term effect, which will help resolve the pain, and then such the pain goes away essentially, then the analgesic is no longer needed. So this is the difference. Okay, so let's first look at these multi-system effects. So imagine that you have an individual that has a poor diet and a sedentary lifestyle. And just imagine that you could look at the entire metabolic network of this individual, and that you could represent it with this sort of stick diagram here in the middle. And the blue represents the healthy state, and the red represents the less healthy state. Okay. And imagine that you could see that this red metabolic network has sort of shifted from healthy to less healthy. And it's a complex thing. It's just not just one thing. But then this person goes to the doctor, and then the doctor decides, okay, well, let's measure something. Let's measure your triglycerides, okay? And you can see that in this case, the person's triglycerides are elevated. And use this as a biomarker and say, you have problems with your lipids. Let's start a medication that will help. And so the patient is started on a medication. And lo and behold, they go back to the doctor 6 months later, and their triglycerides are back to almost normal, which is great, wonderful. But what you don't see here, because you don't have the ability to look at the entire metabolic network, you can see that some other things have happened, that this network has sort of distorted, and to accommodate this change in the triglycerides. And what we know about statins, for example, is that they have an effect on the pattern on the entire pathway of cholesterol biosynthesis that involves HNG-CoA reductase. And this is a pattern that doesn't control just cholesterol. It controls many other things, including ubiquitin. I always have a problem with this word, ubiquitization. I can never say this word, I'm sorry. Of proteins, essentially this very important pathway that involves very, very fundamental aspects of metabolism. So for a long time, people have wondered about that, but it's never been able to pinpoint. A lot of times people who are starting on statins, for example, have problems with myalgias, muscle aches, but it's never been really pinned down as to muscle aches are so common that it's very hard to sort of tell whether the statin is doing it. When you compare it to placebo, you don't really see a difference. But there's been a concern about this for decades in the literature. And here's a relatively not so recent, but 2011 study in animals where they looked at the effect of a statin, in this case, atorvastatin, on rats that were exercising. You can see that the controls here with exercise, which is the black bar, improve their mitochondrial function. And but the atorvastatin reduced it. And when you looked at the effect of exercise in the presence of the statin, it was essentially wiped out. So that when these rats were exercising in the presence of the statin, their mitochondria were no longer gaining in their oxygen capacity. Now, this is worrisome in a sense that you might be, by taking a statin, you might be robbing yourself of the benefit of exercising. So is this true in humans? Now, we don't know the answer to this. However, there's a study that is recently just been started, and this is a study in Europe. A lot of this research is happening in Europe, actually, not here, that examining the combined effect of statins and exercise on skeletal muscle mitochondrial content and function. And so they're going to randomize people, and this study is ongoing, to placebo, atorvastatin, as well as exercise, and with a 2x2 factorial design. And you can see that what they're looking for is to understand whether the patients who are taking the statin are really benefiting from the exercise as well as the patients who are not. So it'll be very interesting to see the result of this study. Now, let's look at another approach. Imagine the same patient who is presenting with the same elevation of lipids, but who is now saying, well, okay, let's start you on a program of exercise and stress management and a diet and see what happens. And you can see that the person may come back 6 months later and not only have the triglycerides improved, but a lot of the whole network is now shifting back towards a more healthy state. Now, that's not difficult to imagine, but it's harder to measure because typically we don't measure a lot of very different types of biomarkers, and frankly, we don't understand very well yet how well they interact altogether. There's a program called Bridge to AI. It's a common fund program that's going to look at exactly this, where they're going to measure a lot of different, very, very extensive phenotyping in individuals who are pre-diabetic, who are managed with either lifestyle intervention versus drugs. And so it'll be very important, very interesting to see what happens there. And the concept of moving from a healthier state to a less healthy state is called pathogenesis, right? That's how we understand how disease happens. But what is the reverse of that, right? Is the process of moving from a less healthy state to a healthier state? What is the mechanism of this? We know nothing about this. We don't understand. We don't know whether it's the pathogenesis in reverse, or are there other pathways that need to be activated in order for an individual to return to health? We don't know this. We really need to understand this better. Now, if you compare the two approaches, right, the pharmacological approach where you have a very precise target, and you have that can be improved by the drug, but yet is accompanied by off-target effects, which are typically recognized as adverse effects, which are tolerated because we're so focused on ameliorating the target, versus a whole person health approach where your off-target effects may actually be beneficial as opposed to harmful. So this is where understanding salutogenesis, why that's so important. Let's now move on to the dose. This is a very interesting concept now called hormesis, which has been around now for decades. But people are just starting to understand how to investigate this. This again is a study from Europe, from Sweden, where they looked at a resveratrol, which is what generally believed to be an antioxidant. And when they looked at a range of doses, they found that at low doses, the effect of resveratrol on the viability of cells was opposite to that of the same compound used at a higher dose. And what they found is that the lower dose, the resveratrol was actually acting as a pro-oxidant, not as a mild pro-oxidant. And what it was doing is it was inducing the cells to produce their own antioxidant response, such as glutathione enzymes that control glutathione metabolism. And so their conclusion from their study is that resveratrol actually at a low dose can induce a mild oxidative stress, which induces an energy metabolic shift to a more sort of resilient response of the cell. And they're proposing that, in fact, that we're using antioxidants in the wrong way. Instead of using them at high doses, where they would act themselves as basically dumping antioxidants into the system, you could use them at a lower dose, where you're inducing the body's own antioxidant protective responses. And this is something that we're starting to look at. The concept of hormesis is really interesting because it can apply to so many things. We are understanding now in the stress literature that small amounts of stresses, such as, for example, exposing your body to cold temperatures. Probably all heard of these cold plunges that people do, dunking into taking a cold shower or something like that. Of course, not to excess, but can boost immune responses. But when you overexpose the body to stress, it becomes toxic. So stress exposure can also have this kind of hormetic, and the idea here, this is an image of Japanese art of a bowl that's broken and repaired with gold, where the bowl is actually more beautiful than before it was broken. And the idea that some amount of stress can be beneficial to us from all kinds of, from a biological, from a behavioral, from even a spiritual dimension, that are accumulating stresses over our lifetime can make us stronger. So this whole adage of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger may apply here. So now, finally, let's look at sort of the duration of effects, longer term adaptive, protective, preventive effects. What do we mean by that? The concept of resilience is very important here. And this is something we've been working on in Office of Dietary Supplements. Has been a leader in this area in research on resilience. Understanding, this is the definition of the research. There was a working group on resilience that published this wonderful definition of the ability to adapt, recover, grow, resist, adapt, recover, or grow from a challenge, be it an acute or a chronic stressor. And of course, this is something that we've known for a long time, right? The whole concept of homeostasis, to the ability of the body to return to equilibrium. We've known this for a century. Right. For example, when you go outside and in a cold environment, your ability of your body to return to body temperature, and the same thing when you're exposed to heat. But there are also more complex mechanisms that we're starting to understand, where if your body is injured beyond simply a simple resisting, but where your body is stressed, for example, during an injury, how does the body recover from an injury? And we're starting to understand that there are mechanisms that some of them, for example, are pro-resolving mechanisms that help the body to turn off inflammation. It's not just ending the inflammation, but it's inducing the process of repair, of cleaning up the mess, of protecting the body so that the inflammatory response does not continue forever and hurt the individual. Some of these omega-3 derived what we call pro-resolving molecules are some of this research is a little controversial right now because it's difficult to measure, but it's undeniable that there are very specific processes in the body that are dedicated to resolving inflammation. And it's very important that we understand this. So what about resolving pain? Well, same thing, right? Say you have an injury. You can it's very important, obviously, that we have analgesics to treat pain in the acute stage. But what about pain during the resolution phase, during healing? And we're starting to understand that recovering from an injury is extremely important, not just to provide analgesics to resolve the pain, to reduce the pain temporarily, but help the pain to resolve so it doesn't become chronic. Because there's a lot of problems when pain does not resolve after an injury. And the idea that to promote pain resolution, we need to understand how better to apply both a whole person approach to this, attending to all the psychological aspects, to emotional self-regulation, stress management, sleep. That's all very important in order to resolve pain. But also, for example, say you have an injury of a joint, restoring movement to the joint, manipulating the joint, and also paying attention to nutrition. These are all components that we need to understand better as how to promote. And why is that? We need to pay attention to the structural, mechanical, and metabolic environment of.
We lost your voice again, Helene.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
you're back. Okay.
Okay. And the video went away too. If you do not resolve pain, the function of the joint, for example, may not return, which would predispose you to developing degenerative diseases in the long term. So this is all really, really important. And I'm mentioning the concept of recovery and convalescence. This is something that we are really neglecting in medicine in general. We are seeing an example of this in the acute to chronic transition can occur not just with an injury, but can also with any illness. COVID-19 is a great example of this, right? We know that some individuals would contact, COVID in infection, would recover and would not have prolonged symptoms, where others do and develop long COVID. And we still have really very little understanding of why that is. But if you go back to the old literature and old textbooks and even novels from the 18th, 19th century, people paid a lot of attention to that convalescence phase. You paid attention to rest and sleep and diet and what to eat. And we hardly pay attention to that anymore. I think that this is really something that we need to, understand how to support the recovery after an illness, paying attention to the nutrition and physical and psychological aspects of whole person health. So, as far as research on resilience, we're very fortunate that we're starting to have programs that are dedicated to this. We're delighted that all 3 programs in the current version of the Carbon program are focusing on resilience. And this is great. It's a great start. But I want to remind all of you that we're kidding ourselves if we think that a single molecule is going to is going to lead to resilience. It's got to be a whole lot more complicated than that. We need to understand how best to use natural products in order to improve resilience, but we're going to have to understand how they work in the whole context of the whole body, the whole person, multi-system effects, understanding the effects of different doses, and also understanding their effects over the course of a long period of time, including prevention of illness. And this is research that's tricky to do. But we need to be very cognizant of the challenges ahead and meet them. I think that the focus of the current administration, the government administration on chronic diseases is very apt, very important. And I think that we can meet the challenge of addressing the epidemic of chronic diseases by really looking at whole person health as a way to get there. I want to stop here and happy to address. I'm going to stop my sharing and happy to address any questions.
Thanks so much for that great presentation. Lots of comments to that effect in the chat as well, Elaine. And yes, we will be making the recording available, I believe. So, let's see, going back, the resveratrol study that you showed, do you know what the source of that, by any chance, what the source of that resveratrol was? Somebody asks whether it was from Polygonum cuspidatum.
Well, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can certainly find out. And the reference is in
It's on the slide, I think. Yeah.
In the slide, so you can. I cannot say that off the top of my head. Sorry.
Scrolling backwards, some words of concern about the rat statin study and concentrations, and whether those translated to human statin use.
On which study was taught about the statins?
I think the rat statin study that I thought was very interesting, where there was an adverse effect on modulation of mitochondrial number and activity. But so statins
yeah. I don't know this. Again, this dose was on the high side, I think. So I think it's very important that when they do the study in humans, because that's essentially where the bottom line is going to be in that study in humans. The whole statin story is very confusing, right? If you look at statin myopathy, there's at one end of the spectrum, you have the sort of rhabdomyolysis and, muscle damage, etc. Not very many people develop that. There's a lot of people who develop these vague myalgias that are very common, even people who don't have statins. So when people compared a statin with placebo, they were not able to show any difference in myopathy. And that's one of the reasons why statins are recommended. And so, but I think that if you look at the literature, there's over and over again, people have shown that there are effects of statins. They've shown in cell cultures, some in animal studies, and all, it's not. It would be very, very surprising if you block the pathway to cholesterol synthesis and not have any effects. I know the body has a lot of workarounds and different pathways to get around this, but I really, from my own personal standpoint, I think the jury is still out about whether or not there are other effects that we may not be aware of. So it's not just for statins. I'm not just picking on statins just because of one thing, any drug for that matter. Once we start looking at metabolic pathways and we have the ability to look at a whole physiome, of a person in a much more extensive way, I think if we have the courage to look at some of these adverse drug effects, or even, adverse or not, drug effects, I think we're going to find a lot more metabolic derangements than we care to look at right now. I think we want to really explore that. I think it's going to be very, very important.
Yeah, and yes, throw a gear into homeostasis at your peril, right?
Exactly.
And thank you for that wonderfully cogent case for the importance of multi-component interventions. Better than I've been making it, I think. So a question, well, first of all, a shout out and thank you from Drew Bremer for referring to the ONR strategic plan, which is super exciting that that's out. And a question from my ODS colleague, Johanna Dwyer, about food addiction, and whether you could hum a few more bars about that. What's the evidence for that? And yes,
sorry,
Johanna,
my sound
evidence. No, it's me. I'm sorry. It's my internet. Let me stop my camera and see if that's better. Food addiction. What's the evidence base for food addiction? She also asked about flavonoids and effect on vascular resilience. And yes, Johanna, I can give you some data on that. But I think there's some good data. But food addiction, Elaine, could you say a few more words about that in the evidence base?
Food addiction, I mean, this is something we don't really know what the role of the food itself is, right? There may be foods that are being developed, like for example, additives in that are part of developing the food that are being tested in order so that people eat more of them. We know that food companies do this, that they'll test them in the lab with potato chips or something, and they'll change the flavoring of it in order to induce people to eat more. I mean, that's not a secret. And that's how they sell more of it. So now, how does increased consumption of something turn into an addiction is another, there's one thing about over consuming and it's another thing about being addicted. So this is where these mechanisms, in the brain that control our responses to emotional responses have to do with triggering, for example, eating in response to stress. So this is very complicated. And so, but it's very similar to the other types of responses that people have when they're addicted to other types of things. It's not just for food. So I think that by understanding better the effects that, say, for example, the GLP-1 agonist drugs have on one of the first things that people describe is that they're craving less food. And the craving for, say, an opiate, a drug, and the craving for, cigarette or, a bag of potato chips, there's a relationship there. But again, it's how that behavior becomes, impairs somebody's, ability to function, et cetera. There's a whole gradient of that. So it's not black or white. But there's definitely an aspect of understanding the components, how the components of the food that we eat influence these types of behaviors. I think it's a very important thing to understand.
And it would be really interesting to learn more, which I hope we will be doing, about the role of the gut microbiota and all of that.
Right. Absolutely.
A question from Lori Dons at NHLBI. How do you see the role of prescription type medications in whole person health?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so here's this, on that continuum from health to disease, once a disease is diagnosed and once there starts to be, some, serious pathophysiology, of course you need to treat it, right? Where is that line? So, for example, with the diabetes, I mean, we know that once they're past a certain point, if you do not treat diabetes, you need to, because this is where it starts to affect the organs, and it would just be a very bad idea not to treat it. On the other hand, there may be a period of time before the disease has become fixed and manifested, that where the metabolic abnormalities are more labile. We call this, some people call it pre-diabetes, but it can just be simple, lack of reduced glucose tolerance. At that point, especially if there are as concomitant obesity, weight gain, for example, and importantly, psychological stress. If the person is under stress, addressing that can be very helpful, helping the person sleep. This is, I think, a very underappreciated aspect of things. We know that chronic stress affects glucose metabolism. It affects immune function. It affects blood pressure. It affects so many things that are components of chronic diseases at an early stage. So addressing stress, sleep, exactly. So by simply helping an individual to have a better night's sleep, first of all, they'll have more energy the next day. They'll have more energy to go and get their exercise, go to the grocery store, buy the food, cook it. If you don't have a good night's sleep, all that is out the window. So this is why paying attention to all three legs of the stool, psychological, physical, and nutritional, together, is so important. That's whole person
health. So lots of requests from our 200-ish attendees for your presentation, but I think that's a perfect note to end on. So thanks so much, Helene. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye.